All right, thanks everyone, and welcome to the Commission of Inquiry. You've got a challenging task. The future of local government is very open at the moment. I suppose the previous speaker was full of energy and good ideas, and one of the things that we all work with is constraints. And I don't know whether I'm a half full person or a glass half empty person, but one of the things that if local government is to manage in the future, it needs to be sustainable, it needs to survive, and it needs to work in a framework within its financial capacity, I suppose. So from a operational point of view, you need systems and processes to actually manage your future financial performance, and we use the financial tools as an indicator of sustainability. But we need to also put an overview on that, is that solutions are not always financial. So when you're looking towards the future, it's not always a financial equation, because what you want to do, you may be able to do in other ways, as the speakers have indicated. If we take a traditional model, local government, 3 areas. Most councils, local government, aspire to provide the community with basic needs. That's really where you are. Quite often, local government wants to go to intermediate needs, and of course there's the wants. And you can see yourself probably and position your council in that hierarchy. If I then look at financially positioned, generally speaking, if you're only providing basic needs, then your probably community thinks you're financially challenged. If you're getting up above the intermediate needs, you're probably financially capable. And if you're able to provide to all your community's wants, then you're financially secure. Now that's probably a traditional model. And what we're seeing in local government is we're probably traditionally heading down that way, down the slope. What are we going to do to move forward, and how are we going to get there? That's really the challenges this conference is all about. Is that acceptable? Is that where you want to be, or do you want to do something else? Remember, this is a financial perspective. The ideas and your future aspirations for your community need to fit within your financial framework. So if we look at some of the broader challenges for local government, and you've probably seen some of these, so I won't run through them, but what we're really saying here is that there are enormous changes coming. The rates of change are actually the rates of change are growing, and there's a lot of issues in the broader environment that impact on local government that you've actually got no control over. And you must plan for the future in that environment. In the local area, and this is local government in Victoria, I'm sorry for the interstate people, but it's probably relative. We've really got a two-speed local government sector in Victoria, the rural areas and the urban areas. Now, in the rural areas, they're really faced with some real challenges at the moment. This is where the innovative thinking probably needs to come in early, but in the urban areas, it's starting to catch up with you. These factors that we're talking about are coming both for the rural and urban areas, but certainly very present in the rural. Population decline. Of the 47 rural councils in Victoria, 22 of them have got negative population growth. There's a low median household income, less than $700 per week in 35 of the 47 councils in rural Victoria. Now that's the median income, so half the population is earning less than that. Think about your capacity to raise rates out of your revenue rates out of that community. In the rural area, 81% of the communities registered have got a registered increase in the disadvantage. I know that's a negative, but there's a disadvantage in the socio-economic disadvantage index. So the communities are actually getting socially more disadvantaged moving forwards in the rural areas. The average age of the population is increasing, and the disaggregation of the land holdings. So in actual fact, to raise revenue, and you probably understand that, but as the population declines, if the assessments stay the same, there's less household income across those assessments. Your ability to raise rates in there. Now in Victoria, the peri-urban councils and the regional cities in those areas are faring much better. That's where the population tend to aggregate to, or the Melbourne growth area, the tree changes or the sea changes going to that area. In the urban situation, population growth is generally positive. It's happening in all but 2 councils. There's higher median income. But there is still an increase in the social disadvantage. So collectively, our communities are actually declining. Now, if local government wants to make an impact, we deliver social services out there, we need to be mindful of that. And of course, the average age of the population is more stable. It's growing, but the demographics are staying more stable in that area. And of course, there's a growth in number of properties. The outer areas, of course, the interface councils growing hugely in Victoria, Wyndham being the highest growing council, highest increased council in Victoria, but also with the inner metro ones, you've got multi-unit developments, high-rise developments and things like that. This is the environment in which we find we have to sort of think about in a financial sense. I haven't got the same slide for the urban areas, but for the rural areas, we take population growth. The darker the red, the more negative the population growth. We take the household income. The darker the red, the lower the average median household income. Population profile, you can see the age variation moving up the stream. And of course the socio-economic disadvantage index, the deeper the red, the lower the value. These are our constituents. This is the communities in which we've got to be innovative to try and provide services into. So, in relation to local government, we've dealt with the national, the local, now we go to local government. You know, there are changing community and social expectations. Even the rural area people have high expectations of what's needed. And there are social changes we're talking about. There's pressure on council to retain their identity independence. We've talked about representation. We need to ensure there's representation and advocacy for the local communities. Tighter public sector funding. We just heard recently that the Grants Commission has been pegged for the next 3 years as one example. I think there'll be more reductions coming forward. And when we get to another slide, you'll see just sort of what the percentage of external funding into councils is. And of course, the community is starting to get resistant to large rate increases. It's getting concerning that councils are thinking about, you know, an average of 6 or 7% per annum rate increase moving forward over the 10-year cycle. I'll show you some figures of that in a minute. We're also seeing a transfer of service provision from central government. Local government are the service providers, but you only get some of the funding, generally speaking. And of course, you've got the unfunded infrastructure or renewal gap out there. In Victoria, it's about $2.3 billion over the next 10 years. I mean, it's negative, but this is the environment that you've got to deal with. You've got to find innovative solutions to work forward for. So I suppose what I'm saying is the world is contracting, but local government wants to expand. You need innovative solutions to go through this process. So if we just look at just a quick scenarios, rural areas, 95.6% of the state, this is just taken out of the Victorian Grants Commission returns, 95.6% of the state in the rural areas, 4.4% of the state in the urban. There's 1.2 million people in the rural areas, 4.4 in the urban areas. Population densities, 0.5 head per square kilometre, up to about 360 head per square kilometre. That's the large rural shires versus the provincial cities. And the metros, you can see we're up to 4,800 people per square kilometre. High density, easy to service. And of course, road lengths and things. But when you look at rates affordability, I don't know whether you can read the charts up there, but the average assessment, or the average ratio across the rural areas, it's sitting just under 3.5%. So the 3.5% of the median household income is going towards the average rate. In the urban areas, it's sitting at about 2.5%. So some sections of our community are actually paying proportionally more for the services they get. And some would argue they're paying proportionally more in relation to their income, they're probably getting less services. Is that fair and equitable? How can we deal with that? And of course, within the organisation, how do you structure organisation to deal with the community and social expectations? We've talked about networking and what have you, but the community has some change, but the organisation needs to deal with this. How do you manage expectations? Priority setting. You've got an ageing workforce, skill shortage. Although these are not necessarily financial, they all impact on the council's capacity to provide the services out there. And of course, I don't know a council yet that I haven't been to in the last 2 years that I haven't spoken to someone that says we haven't got time to do everything we need to do. We're trying to do too much. Or are we trying to do too much? So if we look at the finance of the council, traditionally income and expenditure. And I'm not an accountant, so if the numbers don't add up, that's all right. I'm an engineer. Rough enough's nearly good enough. No, the bridges always stand up. It's okay. But you look at the funding sources. Rates and charges, generally in Victoria, it's in the order of 50 to 60% of council's revenue or income comes from rates and charges. About 15 to 20% user fees and charges. Councils, you've generally got control of those. You set your own rates, you set your own fees, usage charges. The balance is external funding. You've really got not much control over those. Sure, you can go and put applications in and what have you, but we know they're probably going to decline in the future. How do you manage your finances? From an income point of view, generally, even though you can set your own rates and charges, you actually can't go much above what the community will pay. We're already starting to see pushback there, and in Victoria you probably heard the opposition leader say, well, we're talking about rate capping. New South Wales has had it for a while. You know, you may lose control of some of that soon if we don't manage adequately. In the expenditure side, generally, and this is just all expenditure, it's not financial expenditure, I'll put it that way, service delivery generally takes up about 60% of council's expenditure. Internal support services, those services that support the organisation, you know, corporate services, the HR, payroll and what have you, most councils it's 12 to 15% of your total expenditure. Capital sits somewhere between 20 and 30%. And of course you've got a few interest payments. Most Victorian councils haven't got a lot of debt, so the interest payments are fairly short. So if we look at that, what can we do? Employee costs. Employee costs run at about 40% of your total expenditure across councils. This is average. And this is global costs across all Victorian councils over this period of time. Our company's been monitoring this through public sourced information. The blue is actuals, and they're coming out of council's published annual reports. The brown is projections coming out of council's published budget statements. So we're aggregating information, publicly available information. You can see how their employee benefits are growing. You can see the actuals are a little bit below the budget area. Not sure what that is, we haven't delved right into that yet. But generally the employee cost increases are running at about 5 to 5.5% across councils. Bearing in mind that employee costs are sitting at about 40% of your budget. If you take the 5% into 40%, that's contributing about 2.5% increase to your rates every year. If you're going to benchmark that against CPI, running about 2.5%, your employee costs are actually contributing to your CPI growth. That's on average. So something to think about there. Materials and services, once again, councils are spending about $2.5 billion on materials and services. Annual increase is sitting somewhere between 4 and 4.5% growth. This is across the sector, not between individual councils. Operating expenses, they're increasing at about 4.4%. And you can see the natural growth there. Back in 2007, 2008, the total operating expenses for councils across the state of Victoria was just over $5 billion. By 2016-17, it's estimated to be about $8 billion. That's the sort of growth that's happening across the sector. Do contribute substantially to the Victorian economy. But those of you in local government, just in Victoria and I suppose other states, we've just been through a budget process. I'm not sure that this truly reflects the actual needed growth in operating expenses, because every year about this time council officers have been through a process where they've actually pruned the wants of the staff and wants of the community back to fit within your available funding. So this reflects what is actually being proposed, not necessarily what you probably want to do. So it balances out. So we can't the 4.4 annual increase, I think, is a balancing item rather than actually what's required out there. We'll drop through that, or we'll keep moving. So total income. The interesting thing here though is the main source of income for councils is rates and charges. If you look at that growth over the last the last 6 years, the forward forecasts, you'll see that there's been the rates and charges generated from councils 2007-2008 is $3 billion, heading up to about $5.5 billion by 16-17. The red line is the global increase in revenue generated by rates and charges per year. So it's averaged somewhere between 6% and 7%, peaking up at 8% over that period of time. So you've got this issue now of, will the community continue to pay an annual increase of 6% moving forward? It's a bit of a challenge. So we'll just move into, how do you actually manage for the future? You look at the long-term financial plan, and basically you need a good financial management, good long-term financial plan. It helps you manage within a resource-constrained environment. As a community, I don't believe we accept large rate increases. And if it's good, then the decision makers and policy makers can actually get advice to make sound decisions, scenario planning and things like that. If you look at those two graphs there, as I said, this is just a snapshot of two councils. The blue is the actual, the brown is the long-term financial plan, those councils. No names, no pack drill, but I'd suggest that the long-term financial plan, those two councils are not really reflective of capacity within those two councils. They're projecting a story, but look at the history. Now, it may not be intentional, but when you actually take a swipe across the sector, and you can see this, and there is too many of those across the sector. If I move into the underlying operating position as examples, these once again are examples. The top two are councils who are basically in trouble. Top left-hand corner, you can see underlying deficits rolling forward over the full life of the plan, strategic resource plan. They'll run out of cash sooner or later. Might not run out of assets, but you might run out of cash. And the one on the on your right-hand corner there, I think that council needs to think about their forward financial strategy. They really can't do it. The bottom two, the one on the bottom left is a good example. There's nothing wrong with the odd deficit here and there for special reasons, but over the long term you need a positive cash flow to make it work. And the other one, a bit of a turnaround in there. So they're just examples of how you can use long-term financial plans and modelling to determine, to help you sort of decide what you can actually afford and not afford. So the current way of doing things, I don't believe, is no longer sustainable. There are cost increases above residents' capacity to pay, your service delivery is actually under threat, your assets are degrading, and there's a risk in Victoria especially of government intervention if we don't get our house in order. We need to think about it. And there can be a new way. If we look at expenditure, we've talked about revenue. I've shown you some of the facts and figures about your community's capacity to pay. There's some decisions about that. I believe we need to turn into a service-driven view, or service-driven environment. At the moment, I think from a council point of view, we are very good at managing our business. We can make our business as efficient as we like. We actually need to start thinking about, well, what does the customer actually want and what's important to the customer? And then reframe the business around that. I think that's what needs to happen. And we've got in there, I've just broken that up into a couple of internal service areas that can be looked at, but it's about reframing it. So service planning is about the effectiveness of allocation of your resources to achieve the best outcome for your community, whatever that is. Each council's a little bit different, so it might be different for each council's. But basically, make sure it's integrated in a strategic planning context and needs to be linked to other levels of government. We've got to remove this duplication between the three tiers. What you end up with, you want to make sure you're not duplicating services. It needs to be customer and community focused. We actually want to allocate the available resources to the highest need. You'll probably need to set up your systems in such a way that you can make comparative choices. What's important? Where does your resources go? How do you allocate it? How do you measure the outputs and the value of your resource allocation? You want to improve service outcomes, improve customer satisfaction, and most of all, you need transparency. If you start playing around with service allocations, cost allocations, transparency and accountability, I believe, are very, very important. And once you've made all those strategic decisions, you then go and procure it in the most efficient way. So that's just a comment. In the support services, this is the internal and the other support services, and some of the issues being talked around. I believe we need to target efficiency gains of over 30%. If we actually start looking at some of, I'll call it the utility providers, and they don't have quite the same social conscience as councils do, if I can say that politely, but they've achieved substantial savings and operational efficiencies by using targeted service prioritisation of their operations, and they're still being able to deliver good services to their customers. So there's some efficiency considerations in there. Build systems that are customer and service centric. One of the things they need to be, I believe, is adaptive and responsive. We've talked about cloud computing and what have you, but the rate of change is so great now. The legacy systems a lot of councils have got now can't change quick enough to meet the changing needs of the community. I believe there's things there. I've talked about linked up government, shared services. We've had some discussions around that, regional hubs, bureau services, cloud computing. There's all sorts of opportunities there. So in the capital works area, there's a few things up there. The one thing I'd make a point in relation to financing of capital works is we're still seeing too often that decisions are being made here and now, and the life cycle cost or the long-term cost of that particular decision is not being factored into your future. We're actually seeing situations where a long-term financial plan is built around good information, capital investments being provided, but when you look at the cost of the maintenance of that or operation of that facility moving forward, it actually takes it from a positive to a negative if it's not included. So they're the sort of things that you need to think about from that point of view. So in summary, if we're going to get where we need to go, and that's of course a decision for each council, but we're advocating a new way of doing things, the future, I believe, must be customer focused, adaptive and flexible, responsive, robust, because there'll be all sorts of options and scenarios that need to be built in it, and it needs to have integrity. So that's, I suppose, just a quick snapshot of the need to change, what is possible, and also what some of the thinking has to be done to try and achieve your positive outcomes that you want to achieve from a financial perspective moving forward. Thank you.
Jim, thank you very much. It was a very different perspective. I think Tracy will leave a question.
Yes, thank you for that presentation there. The question that comes to my mind, and it's really a combination of reflecting on the two presentations so far, is that the changes required will need to be transformational, not incremental. That requires both an ability to understand the transformational problem, the transformation change, and then to be able to effectively execute that. It's been done in many organisations, so it's not impossible. What would you see as the 2 or 3 barriers, the source reason we can't achieve, or I shouldn't say can't achieve, but what's getting in the way of the transformational change in local government that needs to happen?
I think from my perspective, it's the will for change. There is embedded positions within local government, and that the organisations need to be adaptive, and in that particular place it's a change in thinking. It's a cultural issue rather than a structural issue. It's about the people within the organisation. I believe that most of the communities, especially the communities that are engaged, understand the need to change and the need of positions that the council focuses on to change. I find communities are quite receptive. It's the organisational context and the story within the organisation. So it's come back to the previous speaker, it's leadership, and it's about a will to change. I think that's the important thing. I have seen organisations who, I'll talk from a financial perspective, may be in constrained environments, but they've initiated and created change, even in a constrained financial environment. Where there's a will, there's a way that can be found, that there just has to be that strong leadership and a desire to change through all levels of the organisation.
Thanks, Ian. Just maybe a follow-on question from that. Do you see much transformative change happening where there's not a compressive type force at play? So my observation is where people are facing significant financial challenges, that's an imperative for change, but in the absence of that we see limited change because of the cultural issues that you raised.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I mean, I'll even say myself, I am naturally lazy too. If I'm not pushed into a particular position, or I won't say pushed, encouraged, if I don't see the need, and I can reflect that on other people as well. But those organisations that have an external force that creates a need, then that generates a willingness, and it turns around. It moves very quickly then.
Thank you. Maybe just one last question, which is sort of the innocent from abroad reflects on what you put out there. You had a very good slide where you talked about two-speed level development, and obviously one of the things that's going on in areas of growing population is that's an increasing capacity to raise rates revenue without raising the level of rates, just that there are more willingness to tax. The whole structure of the system of local government finance in the place I come from, thanks to a pair of characters called Sydney and Beatrice Webb, who sort of started out in the East End of London in the 1920s, noting that there was a gap between the capacity of very poor places to raise money and tax and their ability to provide services. The entire system of local government finance in the UK is based on redistributing between places with a really strong tax base and places with a really weak tax base but a high levels of poverty, high levels of demand. Why doesn't the Australian system do that?
I'm not sure I can answer that one. There is a very strong propensity in Australia to we will look after ourselves type approach, and boundaries create that particular aspect. I mean, I was working in an organisation yesterday, a different one that wasn't local government, and that organisation was constrained by the way they worked because they'd set themselves up, their departments were based on their funding sources. So a department was funded from a particular source and that was their role. Another area of the organisation was funded from another source and that was their role, and there was no synergies between the two. And that's probably something in our psyche that we've got to get over and think about. One of the things that is possible potentially is a regional hub, and it's starting to emerge in some areas where I'll call it the stronger, larger councils can support the weaker, smaller councils around them. We talked about examples this morning was Orange and the two councils up there, and that's a concept. But there seems to be a resistance to share, and we've got to overcome that, and we've got to actually work together collaboratively. And that's a word that's been used, I expect, right through this conference, to actually share and recognise that we can work together for the mutual good, rather than protect our patch to think we can do it better our way.
Thank you. I also heard the room answering that question as I asked. So let's have somebody from the floor and then maybe come back to the panel. So, hand down here.
And Jackie.
Hello, Paul Crapper from the City of Darra. Having come from state government, it seems to me that local government hasn't looked at its structures and really reinvented itself. You see in federal and state governments they reinvent various departments, etc. from time to time to move to needs, but I sense that local government is still one of servicing and reacting as opposed to really future planning. Does anyone have a comment on that?
Another question, yes? Jackie?
Jackie Fostecchi, City of Yarra, and Inner Northern Council, adjacent to CBD. Again, you highlighted the need for us to allocate resources to areas of highest need but containing our costs and the unsustainability. At the other spectrum, we've got decisions made at federal and state government that are exacerbating the need for resources from local government to be allocated to those of highest need. And I just looked at the mental health services being allocated to 3 larger organisations, so a lot of the smaller organisations won't have funding, and that's been based on sort of the principle of allocation of funds to serve the interests of bureaucracy, so they only have to deal with 3 organisations rather than multiple organisations, not designed to the interests of the community. Declining TAFE apprenticeships, and the no commitment, say, to share of kindergartens by the Commonwealth, their share for the 15 hours kindergarten policy. So there's a whole range of areas which are putting extra pressures on local governments as a result of the state and federal decisions. And I've only just highlighted a couple. So how are we ever going to overcome the problems we have in terms of our infrastructure gap and the gap between servicing those disadvantaged community? Because if 17% youth unemployment in so many areas, our youth services and our supports for young people are only going to increase. So I can only see it getting worse, otherwise we turn our backs to the most disadvantaged people in our community in the way that the federal and state governments are. And that's untenable from a local government perspective.
I think local government has a very strong social conscience, and we're all aware of those, but if I put a commercial hat on, we've only got what we've got in the bank. And we have to make the choices. And sometimes it may be hard choices because you can't spend in the long term what you haven't got. So I think councils are going to have to think about what is truly important to them and what is not quite as important to them, and work within that funding capacity. And I suppose I should put a slide up there before about service planning. Where are the greatest needs and how you allocate your funding across that? Because it's all very nice to have a social conscience, but if you've got no money left, you can't do anything. And that's the challenge we face, because each council will have a different idea of what's important, and that's fair, but at the end of the day, you've got to work within your financial capacity. Just in relation to structural comment over there, yes, the councils are all independent beings at the moment, but I think what is showing and what the MAV are alluding to and what this whole conference is about is that I don't think we can necessarily afford to be independent beings anymore. What we probably find is important is the advocacy and representation to our community, because it's the community that actually we serve, but then it's about how we can deliver services and maintain that capacity within our financial constraints. And that's I think, the key. I haven't got the answer, but that's what this whole conference is trying to challenge us for.
Okay, thank you very much, and I think we've heard the phrase financial constraint several times in the course of what you said. Thank you very much.
Thank you.